The first time he did it, I bled and I cried a lot. My pimp told me to stop. He had a gun next to him, and I'd seen him use it before. But every day he called me and demanded my work, and he beat me if I didn't.
I was so weak from working all of the time. I would have up to 20 clients per day. One actually had to resuscitate me. Then he continued what he was doing.
He would lock all the doors and trap me in the apartment before he'd go out. If he saw me looking bored while we ate or watched TV, he'd rape me.
Some men were in denial about what they were really doing. They tried to be gentle, or they would talk to me. They make so many excuses for what they do, and it's justified by our culture every day.
I started using drugs, trying to numb myself from the pain until I felt nothing at all. I wanted to make myself the way that they saw me, empty.
Human trafficking is really modern-day slavery.
If I ran away, my pimp and his gang would find me and kill me.
He told me that he'd sold her at a truck stop.
Human trafficking is the exploitation of vulnerabilities. It is the use of force, fraud, or coercion by one person for their benefit, the exploitation of one person for another person's gain.
My mother started doing more drugs, and she would take me with her when she would prostitute herself for her drug money. And then there came a time when she started prostituting me instead of herself. And that happened from the time I was 11 until I was 13, where she would sell me for her drugs.
Every year in the United States, thousands of children are sold for sex and repeatedly raped. Many of these children are moved constantly from city to city, sold for sex up to 10 times a day.
You know, historically, people would talk about prostitution, and they would talk about youth as if they were willing participants in that process. And so they would talk about ungovernable youth, or chronic runaways, chronic truants.
They're told by their tormentor, their sex trafficker, their labor trafficker, that if you go forward, you're going to be treated like you're an illegal immigrant, or that you are at fault. You know, you got yourself into prostitution. And all too often that is actually true, that they'll be blamed.
I didn't know how to call the cops, and even if I did, would they care?
They pretty much acted like I was lying and they didn't care.
They think of it as something that does not happen in our country. They think if it is something that is happening in our country, they think that it is only happening to those who are foreign born, which is untrue, because the majority of human trafficking survivors are domestic. And then on top of that, they think that these are poor 12-year-old girls or 24-year-old women who are being snatched off the street or drugged in a bar, and they're not recognizing the ways in which these women are forced into prostitution. People need to understand that prostitution is synonymous with human trafficking, and that just because someone is walking down the street and doesn't seem to have a man or a trafficker next to her side does not mean that she is not completely controlled. In the United States, the #1 form of human sex trafficking is pimp-controlled prostitution.
The dirty little secret here is that men who buy women and girls for sex create the problem.
It's not the traffickers, they're just doing supply and demand. If there was no demand, then there wouldn't be an issue. And so it is the men and women who are purchasing others for their gratification that are actually the energy that moves the entire system. And this includes not only person-to-person interaction, but also across the internet through use of pornography or video websites.
Technology has fundamentally changed how children are trafficked. Today, an adult can shop from their home, office, or hotel room, even on a cell phone, to buy a child for sex.
When we look at demand, we're having to address a number of things, and one is just a cultural issue with a lack of respect for women, the acceptance of violence against women in our culture and in our communities, but also looking at the addiction, looking at the over-sexualization of our communities, of our young children, and of adults, as well as the proliferation of pornography. It's easy access through the internet that slowly decreases people's boundaries and what they believe is acceptable, and it expands them to take ever more risks risk at gaining sexual gratification.
And so we need to definitely need to strengthen up the laws associated with demand. What % of the population is buying sex? Is it a core component that we need to target? And how do we effectively help those individuals not engage in that practice anymore?
Part of it goes into prevention awareness with even young children in middle school and high school age, talking to them about how to respect their own bodies as well as how to respect the bodies of others. Talking to men about the way in which demand fuels sex trafficking and the consequences of sex trafficking in the lives of these women. Oftentimes men don't recognize that them downloading pornography from the internet or even downloading videos from websites fuels the exploitation of these women, and though they look like they're willing on screen, these women are very much being taken advantage of and often forced into these situations. So until we educate the men on exactly the difficulties or the challenges that these women are facing and educate them as to the consequences of their participating through the purchasing of pornography, I think we won't change demand. So there's a bit of an awareness and education component as well as an addressing of the mental health issues of sexual addiction.
There's the opportunity to talk about decriminalization. Do you want to charge these children with crimes, or do you want to treat them as victims and provide services? So I think they've really done some amazing work. They just have to keep it in the forefront as a critical issue.
Typical signs that someone may be a victim of trafficking. We're looking at young women who have an older boyfriend or a man around who provides them with expensive gifts, who appears to be controlling, likes to isolate them or separate them from their friends. The women are often branded with the names of the trafficker or even the name that he's given them. Sometimes they are given barcodes or other very visible means with which that he declares them his property.
If you know someone who needs help, call the National Human Trafficking Resource Center. To find out how you can make a difference, go to SamaritanVillage.net or northlandchurch.net/one-to-one hope.